And Senator Rennick, you have the call.
Thanks. Hi, guys. Do you understand the meaning of counter-cyclical measures?
Yes, and monetary policy is one of those.
That's a very good point, because if you believed in counter-cyclical measures, and I'll just qualify this by saying that mortgage repayments are excluded from the price of inflation or the inflation calculation. If we've already got fuel rising, rents rising, why are you increasing the cost of living by increasing interest rates when you should actually be seeking to counter those measures? So you're pouring fuel on the fire rather than relieving inflation, because if interest costs were included in inflation rate, this would actually be reflected in a higher inflation rate, not a lower inflation rate.
Yeah. But higher interest rates work in containing inflation by reducing demand. If people have less money in their pocket, they're going to spend less. And the higher interest rates also affect the exchange rate.
Okay.
Just imagine if we left the interest rates low, the exchange rate would be much lower.
Fuel costs, energy costs, the cost of living are already increasing, so demand will come off. All you're doing is adding fuel to the fire by reducing demand much faster at the cost of austerity to low income earners.
Well, we're trying to get the right balance here to get aggregate demand to slow, and our judgment is that the level of interest rates broadly will be enough to do that. But
so I'm glad you mentioned that, the right judgment, because you haven't sought to manage the long end of the yield curve rather than raise interest rates 9 times in less than a year. Why didn't you do some jawboning like other central banks do and say that we will raise interest rates at, say, for example, 0.5% every 6 months so that we lift them by 4% over 4 years, rather than do this sudden dramatic 3% rise in less than a year that is going to hurt many businesses and many people who whether you meant to say this or not, had the impression that interest rates weren't going to rise until 2024.
I mean, just to come back to something you said, other central banks are actually raising interest rates more quickly than we have.
Oh, I realise that, but in the past they've used jawboning as a measure rather than this deliberate policy designed to asset strip people over the long term.
Yeah. I'm just not sure jawboning the 10-year bond yield at the moment is going to affect much in the economy.
Well, you can jawbone the 2-year and the 5-year.
Yeah. Well, the 2-year interest rate is really a reflection of what people think our policy rate will average over the next 2 years, and being as clear as we can about how we think that will evolve. So,
okay, I note before that you mentioned that we're low, we need to improve our capital stock, and you keep saying there's not a lot you can do about the supply side. I disagree with that, because, as Senator McKim has pointed out, the RBA can also be involved with managing the volume of credit, and that was said in the 1937 Banking Royal Commission, the original Royal Commission. If the RBA can lend $188 billion at 0.1% to private banks, and they're profiteering out of that by $5 billion a year, why can't the RBA lend to state governments to build productive infrastructure like power stations, like dams, at a similar low rate?
If the state governments or the federal government wants to do that, they can obtain funding in the marketplace.
But why do we have to pay a premium? Why will a taxpayer then have to pay the margin on that rather than use our own currency? It's our currency. Why do we have to pay a private bank a 2% margin or a 3% margin to use the currency that's backed by the Australian people and the Australian government?
Well, the taxpayer pays the market rate. The government pays the market rate.
And the private banks profiteer out of that market rate.
Final question, Senator.
It borrows directly from investors, from pension funds, kind of the super funds. There's no kind of bank intermediating that. If they were borrowing from the banks and banks were charging the spread, then I could understand what you're saying. But the bank, the government issues its bonds to the super industry, to foreign investors, and they pay the market
foreign
rate.
investors then lend it back to us.
And it wouldn't be. It's not the Reserve Bank's job to determine the allocation of credit in the economy.
Well, that's not what the 1937
Banking Royal Commission said. That would be going back to kind of where we were some decades ago. It didn't work out that well.
Okay, thank you.
Authorised G. Rennick, LNP Chermside.